Welcome, everyone. I'm Bara Vaida, Director of Training with the National Press Club Journalism Institute. Thank you for being with us today. I know many of you have been looking forward to today's program, AI and News, and how journalists can and should start using AI in their work. Before we get started, a few logistic notes for you. We have a live transcription option, which is available to you at any time during this program. The instructions are in the chat. We also hope you'll join in with comments and questions in the chat. So please feel free to open that now and let us know where you're tuning in from. We'll also be recording this program, and a link to the video and resources mentioned during the program will be emailed to you. So if you missed something, don't worry, you'll have a chance to catch it a second time. And it's now my pleasure to introduce our expert instructor, Francesco Marconi. Francesco is a computational journalist and co-founder of Applied Excel, an AI company that has partnered with media organizations like Stat News. So he is right in the thick of using both his journalism and data analysis skills to figure out how to help journalism organizations use AI. Previously, he was R&D Chief at the Wall Street Journal, and before that, the Associated Press. He's an affiliate researcher at MIT Media Lab, and he wrote a book published in 2020 called Newsmakers, Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Journalism. Francesco, we are so glad to have you here today to share your expertise on this quickly evolving technology and story. Everyone, please put your questions in the chat box throughout the webinar. Francesco, I know that you wanted to encourage everyone here to please ask any questions that you want, even if you think it's a really simple question. There are no simple questions, right, when it comes to AI. Francesco will be talking for about 40 minutes, and we will be monitoring the chat for questions. He will try to answer some of them in real time, but we're also leaving another 20 minutes or so to get any questions that he wasn't able to get to. He has also generously offered to provide his speaker notes, which we will send to you in an email after the webinar. And one other note, Francesco, I know you really wanted to convey that we want you and the audience to just bring a sense of experimentation to this discussion about how to use AI in your reporting, because all of this is evolving very quickly. And lastly, while different tools may come up during the session or in questions, the Institute and Francesco are not endorsing a particular AI product. So with all of that, I'm going to hand the baton over to you, Francesco, just to get this discussion started.
Excellent. Thank you to the Journalism Institute for the invitation to share my perspective, and thank you all for joining us today. So I'll be touching on some high-level considerations on the impact of AI in journalism to hopefully accelerate your knowledge and your point of view on artificial intelligence. And then towards the end of the session, I'd like to do a little bit of experimentation, as Bara mentioned, with some AI tools. So we'll have the opportunity to put into practice some of the topics that we discuss during this session. Hopefully we'll have time for questions at the end, but as the team mentioned, please feel free to add them to the chat as I'm speaking. So I think the best way to approach the topic of AI in journalism is to start with a bit of history. So about 10 years ago, the Associated Press introduced this very novel idea of having AI writing the stories, writing news stories. It was actually the journalists in the newsroom who proposed this idea of delegating editorial tasks to an AI system. So it was not a tech team, not business leaders. It was the journalists who identified this emerging technology as a way to alleviate some of the more time-consuming work and scale news production. And so the result of that was, in a way, the beginning of a new era of journalism where humans can collaborate with smart machines. And hopefully that's the theme throughout this discussion, which is not about automation or replacement of humans, but it's more about collaboration and augmentation. And so as these first efforts about 10 years ago at the AP and other organizations as these news automation systems and AI systems were introduced, there was a natural hesitation specifically about the accuracy of the stories generated by AI. And so as a result of that, there were many best practices and standards that were developed to ensure that these AI systems were accountable. So what that means is that although we are hearing a lot about AI today, the reality is that there are many experts throughout the news industry that have been thinking a lot about this for a while and implementing some of these processes in workflows. So, but why are we even talking about AI in journalism? It's not just about experimentation or adopting technology. It's really about thinking about, using these tools to address two very important challenges that we all face in the news industry. So the first one is the need to expand news coverage. So there are more topics, there's more complexity in the world that requires journalists to keep up with. But how can they do that with limited resources? And so that's where AI can come to help overcome some of these capacity limitations. So as I mentioned, we are hearing a lot about AI today, mainly because there's a lot of innovation and very new powerful tools being introduced, but it has been around for a long time. So a lot of you might have heard about this new type of AI, which is called the large language model, LLM for short. And this is the technology that is behind some of the tools that you may already have heard of, like ChatGPT or Bard, which is from a similar product to ChatGPT developed by Google. And so it's important to understand how these systems work, because usually the way they are framed or portrayed is usually almost like magic. This thing magically creates content or magically is able to do certain tasks. So in very simple terms, a large language model is a type of artificial intelligence that is trained on vast amounts of text. That text includes news articles, includes books, Wikipedia pages, and much more. And so the way that these large language models work is that they are designed to process and generate human-like language. So these are machines that are taught how to write. So how does that work? So they are basically analyzing the patterns in the data. In this case, it's text data. And based on those patterns, it can generate coherent sentences. So think about it almost like having a super powered version of predictive text that you have on your smartphone. But instead of just predicting the next word, it's actually able to predict and generate whole paragraphs or answer questions or even write essays or drafts of news stories, which is something that we'll be experimenting today. So again, these language models learn the patterns that exist in language that is based on all of these text data that they have consumed and learn how to replicate. So there's a lot of potential, as you can imagine, and I'm sure you've been reflecting about potential applications of these models in the news industry. And so something that is really interesting is the idea of using AI to analyze vast amounts of data, and so accelerate that process of manually going through documents. And also the idea of connecting different information sources, accelerating content production. And so while AI can analyze a lot of information very quickly, it's very important to pair it with human judgment to ensure accuracy and avoid biases. So that's why it's important to keep in mind not only the potential, but very importantly, the limitations. And so if I were to summarize the limitations, they are twofold. So the first one is what's called the recency constraint. The way that these AI models are trained is that they analyze a large amount of data, but there's a data cutoff. So for example, ChatGPT currently has a data cutoff of, I believe, January 2022. So if you go to the tool and you ask about something that happened in recent days, it's not able to properly answer those questions. Although a lot of these new AI systems are now connected to the internet, so you can get more real-time information. The issue is that they have a hard time with citations and referencing the sources. So it's almost very difficult to trust these systems. So that's an important challenge that needs to be solved for AI to be accurate as it relates to research and in finding factual information, which is related to the second concern, which is around accuracy. So there's a lot of room for improvement as it relates to expertise in very specific domains. The way that these models are trained is that they are basically ingesting millions of documents and text data from multiple sources. So when it comes to elaborate on a particular subject that requires a lot of knowledge and precision, that's where you see some of the mistakes, which are called hallucinations in the world of AI. So very important to be aware of all the potential and the power of these AI systems, but also the limitations in terms of recency and accuracy. So the question I'm sure a lot of you are reflecting on is, how do you even start? And is it difficult to use some of these systems? So before I answer that question, I think it's we should first think about where can it be useful and where are the most common pitfalls. And so a framework that I use is to think about the impact of AI as it relates to the different value points of journalism: news gathering, production, and distribution. So when it comes to news gathering, so actually doing the research, interviewing sources or getting first-party research, LLMs are not yet reliable for factual data collection or research. In fact, these systems often don't cite their sources, so it's difficult to fact-check the accuracy of the text that is presented. But what they are very good at, as it relates to news gathering, or at least story planning, is as a tool for brainstorming. So if you're writing a story about a particular issue, it can help you have, explore different angles, identify, different lines of questioning. But as it relates to factual news gathering, these systems are not there yet, although there's new methodologies being developed that I'll briefly touch on later on. As it relates to the second step of the news process, so production. So let's say you have interviewed your sources, you have done research and collected data points, and now you have that factual information that you've collected and that it's accurate because you did the fact checking. So that's the point where AIs can be extremely helpful, which is the transitioning from your journalistic work to a story. And so basically turning an input that it's factual into a draft of the story. So these AI systems like ChatGPT or Bard or others do a pretty good job at repurposing content. So when I talk about repurposing content, means taking an input that is factual and transforming into a different version. So summarizing, copy editing, and so on. And then finally, the third value point that I mentioned, where we have to think about AI as it relates to news, is the distribution of information. So as younger audiences engage and really develop new habits on interacting with AI through a more conversational experience, you can expect the consumption patterns to change a little bit. And so rather than having having a passive consumption of information, it is likely that people will expect a conversation with the information. And so what does that mean is that rather than just simply presenting an article or a story, there will be opportunities to explore all the information in a story in a more conversational way. So that's those are the three areas, as I mentioned. So news gathering, production, and distribution. And depending on your domain or your function, that's keep in mind those three elements as you explore different applications of AI. So with this in mind, I encourage experimentation. And so you can test different tools that I'll show you at the end, like ChatGPT from OpenAI, Bard from Google, Claude from Anthropic, and many, many other tools. And so, very tactically, if you are concerned about data privacy, a lot of people create, new email accounts to experimenting with these tools. And so these systems are essentially chatbots that you can interact with and ask questions and get answers. So in the world of AI, these questions are called prompts. Perhaps you've heard about the notion of prompt engineering as a new programming language. That's a fancy word to say the way that you interact with AI technology is actually through natural language, not code. Although, of course, you can interact with it through code, but as a starting point, even if you don't have programming languages, you can interact with these systems. And so once you provide a prompt to these AI platforms, they are able to generate a response. So essentially, the prompt serves as a starting point or a cue for the AI algorithm to produce relevant text. So, the models will basically follow your direction. Think about it almost as you're an editor and you're teaching an intern how to be a journalist. So, what these models are currently very good at is as I mentioned, if you start with factual information. So let's say you're writing a story about the spread of COVID, and you may have interviewed, several health officials and experts. And in addition to that, you have data points from, the spread of the infections. With that factual input, you can then ask the system to draft the story. In fact, I have a little, experiment to show you at the end. But to get a good result, you have to clearly describe what you're looking for. So a lot of people get disappointed when they first test these tools because they think they, just can read their minds. And just share some of these factual inputs and expect a beautiful story to come out of it. In fact, there's a lot of knowledge and a lot of expertise required for these prompts. And I think journalists and communicators are in a unique position to really be experts at interacting with AI, because journalists are probably some of the best professionals at asking questions. So in order for you to get a good result or a good response from AI, you need to clearly describe what you are looking for when writing a prompt. So 3 high-level things to keep in mind when writing a prompt, and I promise I'll show you some examples. First one is clarity. So it should be a clear and specific task, so you reduce the ambiguity of the model. So for example, you can say, based on the data points that I'm providing, write a draft story that discusses the need for new measures to control the spread of the virus in my city. The second point is about asking for context. So you can say, this story is intended to explain why the rapid spread of the disease needs to be controlled, and why some health officials are urging measures to be applied. And I'm just giving you some hypothetical examples, of course. And then the third thing is about structure. So you're actually instructing the AI to say, well, I'm looking for a 700-word story with 3 paragraphs. And first, I want to introduce the key idea, followed by the details on health metrics, and then conclude with some solutions presented by experts. So you basically have to tell the AI exactly what you're looking for in order to get a good result. As you experiment with many of these tools, you'll see that often the output tends to be a little bit sensationalist. And so it's also very important to instruct around the tone that is used in the language, so maintaining objectivity. So in addition to the directions that should have clarity, context, and structure, it's important to tell the systems to be objective, to use clear language without adding flair or perspective. And so the important thing to keep in mind here is that it's an iterative process. You're not going to get it right the first attempt. These are very powerful tools for accelerating drafts of stories, but you have to come up with the factual information first, of course, and then you have to develop an entirely new skill, which is the prompting skill, which is very related to a skill that a lot of journalists already have, which is to ask really good questions and to clearly articulate the ideas or the lines of exploration they are looking for. So in my view, I think AI will be as prevalent as a spell check on a Word document. And I believe the vast majority of newsrooms will eventually use some sort of smart system. And so I think it's important to be aware of how they work and start leveraging some of these tools, because they are no different than the introduction of the typewriter or the computer or the internet in the last several decades in newsrooms. And so today's AI in a decade from now will be entirely new technology. And so the important thing here is around adaptability to new tools, in understanding how those tools fit into the journalistic process. And most importantly, how do you uphold the editorial standards to new technology? Technology is always changing and it will always evolve. What doesn't change is the values of transparency, accuracy, and the importance of storytelling. So with that in mind, I also want to point out a few other very practical examples of what these AI tools allow you to do besides story drafting. So you can use these AI chatbot systems to help brainstorming ideas for a story as you're planning to pitch or to explore a particular area of news coverage. You can give it a draft story you created and ask it to critique and help you find angles or blind spots. And so almost as a personalized editor. And AI can also be very, very helpful for versioning. So taking an existing story and producing a new format, such as a summary, an executive briefing, a social media post. And so a lot of this type of work is done manually for the most part. And so that's where AI systems can really help you accelerate some of these more time-consuming tasks that can help free up journalists' time so they can focus on more unique type of journalistic work. So what these systems, again, are not yet reliable for is for factual research, since they already produce, since they still produce inaccuracies or errors. And if you hear the term AI hallucinations, that's what it refers to. So the errors produced by a machine. So I wouldn't, for now, rely on AI for factual research or getting insights into recent events. But that's, there are a lot of new techniques that are being developed to solve some of those issues. So given the, all the limitations and, applications of AI, one thing that I think seemed very important to think about, and a lot of people are thinking about, folks who are involved in sort of the intersection of AI and journalism, is how can we develop AI systems that uphold the values of journalism and can also aid in some of the core things that journalists do. And so, as you can imagine, a key thing to solve is the recency problem. So remember, I mentioned two key problems: recency, so they don't have knowledge, recent knowledge, and accuracy. And so how do we solve this? And so there are new methodologies that are being developed. And I think it's just important to be aware of these methodologies. So you know what to expect. So today it's not the factual research is not reliable, and also the recency, but that's quickly changing. And so there's two things that I want to highlight. So a very promising approach is called retrieval augmented generation. That's a technique for developing AI systems, which you are basically connecting these large language models to an external database. So you're not relying on the language model to have the knowledge or do the reasoning. You're simply relying on it to turn that data into the text. So you can quickly imagine how connecting a language model to a vetted database of real-time information can be extremely helpful for journalism. So, even if you start with a very simple example of real-time sports data, and then having the language model articulate what happened in the game. And so I'm referencing this not to go too technical or too specific, but to highlight that there's going to be new tasks and new skills required from newsrooms and from communicators in general, which is news gathering will not just be about collecting insights from humans. It will actually be also about maintaining accurate databases that you can leverage AI systems for articulating these insights. And I'll show you some examples in just a little bit of how, by connecting a real-time database and a large language model, essentially you're able to create a fully automated, reliable newswire that journalists can use for identifying potential stories. But again, with anything related to AI, we cannot blindly trust these systems. And so there's always going to be the need for humans. And so this is the broad domain of editorial AI and computational journalism. And so the key idea here in the realm of computational journalism that merges the world of news with computation is that we are programming AI systems to follow an editorial constitution, an editorial rule book, if you will. So that means creating guardrails in the AI. So any content that is produced follows core journalistic values such as transparency, accuracy, tone, and ensures that these AI systems can resonate as closely as possible with journalistic standards. The way it works is that when programming the AI, we can set certain types of requirements or commands that basically override the system and say, make sure that this always happens, or that, as an example, that you are always citing the sources, or that you are maintaining an objective tone. And so in addition to this approach of instilling and programming an AI to uphold journalistic values, the other thing that is equally important is having human journalists as part of the audit process, and this is called human in the loop. So having a human journalist involved in vetting a sample of outputs. And once it flags certain inaccuracies, the journalist can say, this is an error, and then you can provide that explanation that the journalist highlighted, or that error, to the AI system to basically learn. And so this is a core process of machine learning, where you show examples of what you want the machine to do. So we are talking a lot about AI doing tasks in an automated fashion, but it's equally important to think about the role that journalists will have in the development of AI. So my perspective is that in the context of AI, the news sector in journalism, in the journalism industry, are often regarded as a spectator. But I believe journalists have a very important and active role to play in the development of artificial intelligence. Not only there's a wealth of data from all the news articles that they produce and the data that they are collecting, but they also, journalists and communicators, possess the ethical frameworks and the fact-checking workflows that can be implemented to improve the accuracy of these AI systems. So this means that rather than simply training these AI systems on news articles, we need to teach the machines how to write and how to follow certain editorial principles. And as I mentioned, this is the concept of editorial AI that I was just mentioning, which is the AI having to abide by a certain set of principles that are defined by human journalists. So now let's switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about some practical issues. And one question that I'm asked often is, who should be credited when AI was used to generate a story? And so there's a few considerations to keep in mind. If the content is fully automated, where basically are connecting, let's say, a database of sports data or financial data, and you instruct the system to generate these little news summaries, that's an example of full automation. It should be clearly stated that an algorithm was used to generate that information. So, for example, at the Associated Press, what we did was just crediting the machine as the author of the story. There was a little algorithmic transparency disclosure at the bottom. While at the Wall Street Journal, it was a slightly different approach, where both the machine as well as the human or the editor who developed and vetted the system were credited. And so if the AI is simply used to spell check or minor edits, I personally don't consider it necessary to disclose it. I don't think it says, different from the current spell check processes that we use. But the important thing is, I think there's a new type of content that we have to keep in mind. So we have, as it relates to storytelling in journalism, so far we have facts, we have opinion. And so if you read the opinion section of the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or any publication, it's clearly highlighted as an opinion. But now we have a third type of story or article, which is algorithms. So you have facts, opinions, and algorithms. And so it's in order to create trust and to be transparent with our audiences, we must disclose that a certain story was generated through AI. And so that's one of the themes that I've been touching on is sort of the importance of transparency. Transparency for the purpose of creating trust with the audiences. I also want to touch on a couple more things before we go into the more interactive part of this session, which is thinking about the impact of AI and language models on the workforce, as well as some of the economic implications. So there's naturally a concern, not only in the news industry, but in all industries, of the short-term impact on jobs. And so AI will impact jobs first in areas like copy editing, editorial curation, journalists who are focusing on creating new versions like summaries or social media and so on. And so these are the roles likely to be affected first. But this shouldn't be seen as a way to reduce the workforce. In fact, the smart news organizations will see this as an opportunity to retrain and to elevate these roles, because what I think will happen, or what I think should happen, is is that these functions that are experts at validating stories and understanding copy and editing and so on, rather than editing stories, what will happen is likely that they will be editing and vetting algorithms. So I think the role of the copy editor will evolve into a role that is more aligned with auditing a system and checking for the accuracy of these AI systems. But the reality is that although some roles will evolve, we are also seeing a lot of new positions, new functions being implemented in newsrooms as a direct impact of AI and the need to implement these systems. So examples are having automation editors, having computational journalists, newsroom tool managers. These are all positions that maybe 15 years ago, 10 years ago didn't exist, and a lot of news organizations are adopting them. And so one thing to keep in mind here is that right now, my perspective is that there's still an innovation gap between the news organizations, the large news organizations that have a lot of resources to experiment, and the smaller newsrooms that don't have those technical resources. The good thing here is that divide, that innovation gap, is being reduced because a lot of these tools are being democratized. So it's no longer, you no longer need a big technology or engineering team or highly specialized journalists in order to be able to leverage these tools, because they are becoming easier and easier to use. And this is an opportunity to level the playing field. So we talked about sort of the impact on jobs. We should also think about the economic impact in a slightly different, and I want to touch on something very specific that I think it's important. So a lot of the search engines that today we use and are main sources of referral to news publications are starting to introduce AI-generated summaries. So if you search, what's happening in a certain part of the world, or what's happening with a certain politician, rather than showing you the links to potential stories you might be interested in, a lot of the search engines are producing these snippets. And so the risk there is that we narrow the audience exposure to a variety of perspectives, because basically these summaries are amalgamating different sources of news and writing a summary and giving you, as the consumer, the direct answer. And so if you have an answer as a consumer, then you have a reduced incentive to go and read the article, which has potential impact on the ad revenue and lead generation for subscriptions. So in a way, the convenience from these summaries is both positive, but also negative in terms of the economic impact to news publishers. So going from a list of links to a direct answer will change the dynamics of how consumers interact with search engines, and that's very important to keep in mind. So in a way, technology companies are stepping into the roles typically held by editors by writing these summaries. And the risk there is, as I mentioned, reducing the diversity in journalistic voices if you simply give an answer. And so technology companies have now a dual role and responsibility. So they are both responsible for content creation if they are suddenly generating these summaries, but also responsible for the distribution of that information. And so it's very important for technology companies to prioritize authenticity and diverse representation. And the best way to do that is actually to partner with news organizations. And so again, what I was saying, that journalists and communicators have a key role in keeping AI accountable and directing the future of the AI sector. this is the prime example of why we need journalistic voices when AI is developed. And so I don't want to end on a negative note. I want to end on a positive note, which is there's immense innovation as it relates to artificial intelligence coming directly from the news industry. So I'm talking about the field of editorial AI in computational journalism, where we have journalists applying editorial standards to AI. We have journalists developing new ways for creating guardrails, ethical guardrails around transparency, trust, and accuracy. And also there's new workflows being developed by news organizations related to having the humans in the loop. So involving journalists in the model's training process and ensuring accuracy at different stages of the AI development process. So I want to now switch to actually show you some tools, and I know there's some questions from the audience here that we'll touch in just a second. Before that, I want to share my screen and show you some of the tools that you are able to use. So can you see my screen? I think you can. So I'll show you different tools. Again, as Vara mentioned, we are not endorsing any of these tools. I think it's important for you to be aware of some of the capabilities, some of the things that you want to experiment. And so I'll touch on a few tools. So we have Claude, which is the chatbot by this company called Anthropic, which you can go to claude.ai. There's a similar tool from Google called Bard. So if you go to bard.google.com, and then you have ChatGPT, which I'm sure you've heard about, which is from OpenAI. So perhaps we can, these tools are free. And so you can, after this session, you can do your own experimentation. So I want to show you some of the things that you're able to do, or at least touch on one example. And then we'll follow up with additional resources for you to explore. So what I did was preparing some hypothetical stories. And so the hypothetical story that I want to show you today is that imagine that I'm a New York City reporter focused on public health, and that I am doing a story about the rising levels of pollution in New York. And so as part of that story, I spoke with different experts, and I selected some quotes here that you can see on my Word document. I have 3 quotes. Again, these are hypothetical just for the sake of this session. And then I also collected some data points from, air quality index, emissions, industrial emissions, and so on. And so what I want to do with you is show you how you can start interacting with these systems if the starting point is factual information that you developed yourself. So for the interest of time, I wrote this little prompt. A prompt is you directing the AI system to write it in a certain way. And so I'll read it to you. I'm a journalist in New York City covering public health, and I'm currently writing a story about the rising levels of pollution in the city. I've interviewed several experts about this matter and have done extensive research on data points that indicate that pollution is getting worse. Based on the quotes and data points I'm providing, write a 700-word story about this issue, highlighting the perspective of the experts and some of the solutions they recommended. Keep the language in the story objective and provide context based on the data points I presented. So this is a prompt. This is basically the instruction. I'm going to paste it here. and I'm going to get my quotes from 3 experts, and I'm going to get my data points. And so now we are going to ask the system to generate a story. So it's starting to write it. And again, something very important is that although you are providing factual information, there are no guarantees that the system will not hallucinate, will not, come up with things that it didn't say. And so the important thing here is that this prompt process is actually a very iterative process. You will not get it right at the first time, and perhaps you won't use the output, but at least it can give you some ideas. And so, as in any other story, you have to review it. And so, one thing that I've noticed with doing a lot of these stories is that there's a lot of flair and a little bit of exaggeration. Like, experts are now stressing the urgency. So I'm not particularly happy with some of this language. It seems a little sensationalist, like despite the enthusiasm and so on. So I had some notes here for how I can edit that story. And so I'm going to add here, I have 3 things that I've noticed the system was producing. So I want to make it less sensationalist. I want to explain why AQI is relevant. Air quality index, we don't explain it. We're just saying, there's a 15% surge. And I also want to make it shorter. So then I'm going to give it another prompt, and the machine is going to generate another version. And so there's different things that you can do here, where you can basically direct the system to write in a way that aligns with what you're doing. But again, even if you're providing factual information, the story draft might have inaccuracies. So you have to always check it. So I want to be mindful of time. I want to show you one more thing, and then like to have some time for questions. I want to show you the example that I was mentioning earlier, where you're able to connect a real-time database with a language model. And this is what Applied Excel, my company, is doing. And so one of the areas of coverage is around drug development in the pharma industry. And so what we did was develop a database of highly accurate, vetted information that we collect from, the FDA, from government sources, scientific literature. And then what you see here is that I searched for Pfizer, and it's producing these little insights that are basically changes to different clinical trials and research around different drugs. And so a lot of this, or all of this data that is a real-time database, has been vetted by journalists. And then what we are able to do next is to then create a real-time newswire of highly accurate information that can also link to the original sources. So all of these stories that you are seeing here, so this is what is this? Janssen. This is an update for Janssen's Crohn's disease study. All of this information here is automated, but it's automated in a way to follow editorial principles. So again, there's the process of using AI in a more manual fashion, story by story. And then the next level above that is that you can connect real-time databases with AI systems to create real-time news reports, and then referencing back the original data. And so you can imagine this as functioning almost as a next generation newswire, where rather than relying on thousands of journalists, you can create newswires that can not only serve the journalists, but they can also personalize to their areas of focus or their beats. So I'll stop sharing my screen. There's a lot of interesting questions. Maybe I'll touch on a few. So so for the first one, can I train AI on my story so it learns how to select information from a document or interview transcript that I do and write a story in my style? So this is a question from William Driscoll. Yes, and the answer to your question is yes. There's a methodology called fine-tuning. Fine-tuning is that you take an existing pre-trained model like GPT or BARD or any of these, and then you show it examples of your stories or your news organization, and it learns the tone and the style. What it doesn't learn, or what it doesn't guarantee, is the accuracy of the system. So it will learn how to write like you, but not necessarily. But it's not guaranteed that that it will produce 100% accurate information. So you'll always have to fact check if you are not implementing these editorial AI guardrails. A question from Azm Al-Mazouni. How would you rate BARD's ability to verify information given its connection to Google search? So I won't, I'm not in a position to rate any of these systems. I think what I'll say is, unless I develop them or my team develops them, I will still apply the same level of analysis and fact checking, because we don't know how. We have a general understanding of the sources and the weights and the methodologies used for training AI, but we don't know their inner workings. And so any AI input, if not developed by you, should be taken with a grain of salt. William has a few other questions. Perhaps I'll come back, but I already answered the question from William.
Thanks, Francesco. We're getting close to the end of our time, and this has been really great. A question that has come up a number of times is, should prompt inputting management become an essential newsroom skill? And if so, how can we be thinking about developing that skill? So how do we find the right questions to ask?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's it's called prompt engineering, although, there's not necessarily a lot of engineering involved. And so there should be a methodical way for developing these prompts and to document them. And so the risk of not documenting and not having a process for it is that you have to reinvent the wheel every time you're trying to have the AI produce a certain type of output. And so there's going to be the need for those types of roles. And in fact, there's many tools that are, specifically designed to maintain these prompts up to date.
Thanks so much, Francesco. We are at just about at that 12:30 point. We absolutely will want to do a part 2 with this. This is really great. So much information. And I'm really looking forward to playing around with some of these tools. This has been such a full hour of helpful advice and resources. And hopefully many of you will be able to take some of what you learned today to kind of demystify this technology and how you might be able to use it. We just want to note to everybody who's tuned in today, if you found this helpful, please consider making a donation in any amount to support more free programs like this. Every dollar helps us produce more programs for journalists. We're going to drop that link in the chat if it's not there already. And we just want to thank everyone again for being here today with all your great questions. As I mentioned in the beginning, we'll be sending a follow-up email with a video recording as well as Francesco's speaker notes. And a very, very big thank you to you, Francesco, for being here today. And you're thoughtful and such a great webinar with so much information jam-packed here. We wish you all a great weekend ahead. And thank you again for being here.
Thank you all, and feel free to reach out at FP Marconi. And thank you for all the thoughtful questions, and thank you, Bara, for hosting me.